The camera was small enough to fit behind the vent grate above the bookshelf. I held it in my palm, still warm from whatever battery kept it running, and felt the weight of something ending. Not heavy, not even dense, just final in a way I recognized from other endings. The LED blinked twice when I pressed the power button, then went dark. I sat down on the couch where I'd read the paper every Sunday for 17 years and stared at the device until my vision blurred at the edges. The lens pointed directly at the seating area where my wife and I had our evening conversations, where we used to have them. I hadn't noticed it missing from those routines until this moment, the silence where words should have been. I wondered how long the camera had been there, how many of those silences it had recorded. I needed to see what was on it before I decided anything else. The flight back from the conference had landed 3 hours early because of favorable winds. I'd taken a cab instead of calling home for a ride, wanting to surprise them. The house had that particular stillness of mid-afternoon when everyone assumes they're alone. I'd gone upstairs to change, then come down to make coffee when I noticed the vent grate sitting crooked. Not much, just enough that someone who'd hung pictures level his entire adult life would see it. I'd pulled a chair over and found the camera wedged into the ductwork, a thin cable snaking back into darkness where it must have connected to a power source. Professional grade, or close to it. Certainly not something from a big box store. My hands had been steady removing it. Training does that, keeps your body calm even when your mind starts mapping possibilities you don't want to consider. I made the coffee anyway, more for the ritual than the caffeine. The machine hissed and gurgled while I found my laptop and the right cable. My reflection in the kitchen window showed a man in his 50s with gray starting at the temples. Good posture from years of sitting at government desks, hands that didn't shake. The external details still matched who I thought I was. The footage loaded in a grid of thumbnail files organized by date. 3 weeks of recordings? I started with the most recent and worked backward, watching at double speed, finger hovering over the pause button. The first few files showed nothing remarkable. My wife, reading in the evening light, our son bent over homework at the coffee table. Me arriving home, loosening my tie, the usual decompression. I sped through it looking for the anomaly, the moment that would explain why someone had been watching us. I found it 18 minutes into the third file. My wife appeared on screen wearing the blue dress I'd complimented at her office party, the one that cost more than she'd initially admitted. A man followed her into frame, younger than both of us, confident in his movements through our space. He touched her lower back, guiding her to the couch. Not a stranger's touch. She leaned into it. I paused the video and stood up, walked to the living room and looked at the actual couch, then back at the screen where two people I didn't fully recognize were settling into cushions I'd sat on an hour ago. The disconnect between present and recorded past created a kind of vertigo. I sat back down and resumed playback. They didn't speak much. That stood out, how little explanation they seemed to need. She poured wine from a bottle I didn't recognize into glasses from our wedding registry. They sat close, but not touching at first, a measured distance that suggested practice, routine. When he leaned in to kiss her, she met him halfway. I stopped the video again, stood, made another pot of coffee I wouldn't drink, checked my watch out of habit, though time had become elastic and unreliable. I'd been home 40 minutes. My wife was at work for another 3 hours. My son had debate practice until 6. I sat back down and kept watching. The footage documented what I supposed people called an affair, though the word felt inadequate for what I was seeing. This wasn't passion or recklessness. It was domestic in its own way, comfortable, a parallel version of the life I thought we had. They talked about his work, some consulting project in the city. She mentioned being tired, something about her boss, normal conversation between people who knew each other well. Near the end of the file, my son came home early. I heard his key in the lock on the recording, saw my wife's face change, watched her and the man separate with practiced efficiency. By the time my son entered the frame, they were two people having a professional conversation about home renovation, something about contractors and permits. My son grabbed a snack from the kitchen, said hello, disappeared upstairs. The man left 5 minutes later through the front door. The next file began 30 minutes after that and showed only my wife, sitting alone in the gathering dusk without turning on lights. I went through 2 more weeks of footage. The pattern emerged clearly once I knew to look for it. Tuesdays and Thursdays when I worked late, sometimes Saturdays when I had training sessions, never random, always the same careful choreography of arrival and departure. I paused on a frame from 10 days ago, a moment where my wife glanced directly at the camera location. Her expression was neutral, unaware. Whoever had placed this camera had done so recently, after the affair had already established its rhythm. The question became who and why. I made a list in a notebook I kept for work, the kind of systematic breakdown that helped me process intelligence assessments. Hypothesis 1. A private investigator hired by someone who suspected. But who would hire one? I hadn't suspected anything. We had no relatives in the area who'd care enough to intervene. Hypothesis 2. Law enforcement, though that made no sense given my security clearance and the scrutiny it required. Hypothesis 3. Someone in the family had placed it there. Our son Marcus was 17, technical enough to set something like this up, and home alone enough to have the opportunity. But why would he surveil his own family? I went back through the footage looking for different tells. Found them in the 3rd file I reviewed, Marcus entering frame, glancing at the vent, a quick look that lingered just long enough. Another file, days earlier, showed him standing on the same chair I'd used, adjusting something in the vent, then testing angles from the couch. My son had put the camera there. He'd been watching us for 3 weeks, and in that watching, he'd captured something that was now mine to know. I closed the laptop and looked at my hands. They were still steady, which surprised me less than it should have. The last time I'd felt this particular combination of clarity and devastation was reading deployment orders, understanding that information changes everything even before you act on it. The house settled around me with small sounds, wood expanding or contracting, the refrigerator cycling on. I'd paid the mortgage on this place for 19 years, painted the walls, fixed the plumbing, replaced the roof after the ice storm. I'd built something I thought was solid, and now I was holding evidence that the foundation had been compromised. I needed to understand my son's angle before confronting anyone else. His room was the opposite of mine, organized chaos that somehow had its own logic. Band posters covered walls I'd painted blue when he was 8. His desk held 2 monitors and enough equipment to run a small production studio. I'd been proud of his initiative, the way he'd taught himself video editing and sound design. I sat in his chair and opened his laptop. He'd never been good about passwords, using the same variation of our dog's name for everything. The desktop showed project folders organized by date and subject. One stood out, Observation Study, Spring. Inside were subfolders labeled by family member, mine, my wife's, Marcus's own. Each contained hours of footage from different angles, different cameras. The living room was just one position. He'd put cameras in the kitchen, the hallway, even one in his own room facing the door. I opened a document titled Project Notes and started reading. The writing was sophisticated, clinical even, outlining a study on authentic behavior versus performed behavior within family systems. Marcus had been documenting what he called the difference between what we show each other and what we actually are. He'd noted patterns, interactions, moments when each of us was alone versus observed. Under my mother's section, he'd documented the affair with timestamps and coded references. No moral judgment, just notation of a behavior pattern he'd identified. Under my section, he'd documented something else entirely. Every Tuesday night I told my family I had professional development sessions. The footage showed me leaving. At 7, the garage door closing. What I'd never explained was where I actually went. Marcus had apparently followed me one night. The notes described my car parked outside a house in the suburbs, lights on in the front window, me sitting on a couch visible through unclosed blinds. A woman and 2 children in the room with me. The note said, subject maintains secondary family unit, 2 children approximate ages 6 and 9, regular weekly contact, financial support documented through bank records observed during separate monitoring. He'd found evidence of the life I'd been managing separately for 10 years. The family I'd had before my marriage to his mother, the family I'd maintained contact with through careful compartmentalization and a decent salary that could support 2 households if you were careful. I wasn't proud of it. I'd made promises to both sides that contradicted each other. My first wife had been willing to maintain appearances if I stayed present in our children's lives. My current wife didn't know about them because I'd been a coward when we'd met, letting omission become deception. The further I got from disclosure, the harder it became to correct. My son had documented all of it. Not just the visits, but the bank transfers, the phone calls I took in the car, the way I'd structured my life around maintaining 2 separate versions of myself. I sat there reading his observations about my behavior patterns, how I compartmentalized effectively, and maintained distinct behavioral profiles for each family unit. He'd been watching me the way I'd once watched subjects in training exercises, looking for the tells that revealed truth under the performance. The document ended with a conclusion. Hypothesis supported. All family members perform versions of themselves for other members. Actual behavior observed when subject believes they're unobserved differs significantly from presented behavior. Mother maintains extramarital relationship. Father maintains dual family structure. Subject himself performs academic interest at home while actual interests lie elsewhere. He'd turned the camera on himself too, documented his own performance of being the student we expected rather than whoever he actually was when alone. I closed the laptop and sat in the growing darkness of my son's room, understanding that we'd all been lying in our own ways, all maintaining separate truths that couldn't coexist once exposed. The front door opened downstairs. My wife's voice called out that she was home. I heard her put her keys in the bowl by the entrance, the familiar sounds of arrival that usually meant comfort, routine, the reliable progression of an ordinary evening. I went downstairs with the camera in my pocket and my son's laptop under my arm. She was in the kitchen opening mail, still in her work clothes. She looked up and smiled, the expression she gave me most evenings, warm but distracted. "You're home early." Flight landed ahead of schedule. I set the laptop on the counter between us. Her eyes went to it, then back to my face. I watched her expression shift through several versions before settling on careful neutrality. "I found something while you were at work," I said. "We should wait until Marcus gets home. This involves all of us." She looked at the laptop again, then at me. "What did you find?" "Evidence," I said, "of things we've all been hiding." I walked past her into the living room and sat in my usual chair. After a moment, she followed, sitting on the couch in almost the same spot where she'd sat with the other man. I wondered if she noticed. We didn't speak while we waited. She checked her phone twice, then set it face down on the coffee table. I watched the light change outside the windows, that particular quality of late afternoon that makes everything look temporary. Marcus came home at 6:15. I heard him drop his bag in the hallway, call out his usual greeting. He came into the living room and stopped when he saw us both sitting in silence, the laptop still closed on the coffee table where I'd placed it. "What's wrong?" he said. "Sit down," I said. "We need to talk about your observation study." His face went through its own series of adjustments. For a moment I saw fear, then something like relief, then a kind of resignation. He sat in the chair opposite mine. "You found the cameras," he said. It wasn't a question. "I found one. Then I found the rest in your files." My wife looked between us. "What cameras? Marcus, what did you do?" "He's been documenting us," I said. "All of us. A study on authentic versus performed behavior. He's been watching us for weeks." Marcus sat forward, hands clasped between his knees. "It was for a scholarship project, psychology research. I was going to erase everything after, but then I started seeing things I didn't expect." "Like what?" my wife said, her voice carefully controlled. I opened the laptop and turned it to face her. "Like this." I played one of the files showing her with the other man. Not the kiss, just them sitting together in that too comfortable way. She watched for 30 seconds before I closed it. "Marcus," she said, still not looking at either of us. "How long have you been recording?" 3 weeks. But I've been watching longer than that. I saw him come by when Dad was working late. I wanted proof before I said anything." She closed her eyes. "You recorded us without permission. You violated our privacy." "You violated your marriage," Marcus said, his voice flat. I thought I was going crazy, thinking I was seeing things that weren't real. The camera was supposed to prove I was wrong. "And my recordings?" I said. "What did those prove?" Marcus turned to me. "That everyone in this house is pretending to be someone they're not. Mom's pretending her marriage is fine. You're pretending you only have one family. I'm pretending I care about the things you both want me to care about." My wife opened her eyes. "What? Do you mean one family?" I took the camera from my pocket and set it on the table. "Before I met you, I was married to someone else. We have 2 children together. I never stopped being part of their lives. I've been maintaining both families for the last 10 years. The silence that followed felt heavy enough to press the air from the room. My wife stood up, walked to the window, stood there with her back to us. "Who is he?" I said. "The man you've been seeing." "A contractor," she said, her voice distant. "He did work on my office building. We started talking during lunch breaks." "How long?" 8 months. Marcus made a sound, something between a laugh and a gasp. 8 months. And I only started recording 3 weeks ago. How much didn't I catch?" "That's enough," I said, "both of you." My wife turned around. Her face was composed, but her hands were shaking. "You have another family, 2 children, and you're lecturing me about honesty?" "I'm not lecturing anyone. I'm trying to figure out what happens next." "What happens next," she said, "is you leave. Take your things and go to your other family, the one you apparently prioritize over this one." "I prioritize both equally. That's the problem." Marcus stood up. "I'm leaving. I can't listen to this." "Sit down," I said. "You started this documentation project. You're going to see it through." He sat, but his jaw was tight, his hands gripping the armrests. I looked at my wife. "I'm not defending what I did. I should have told you from the beginning, but I'm not the only one who's been lying." "So what do we do?" she said. "Compare betrayals? Measure which one of us is worse?" "We figure out what's real," I said. "What parts of this can actually continue?" Marcus spoke up, quieter now. "Nothing's real. That's what the study shows. We're all just performing for each other." "That's not quite true," I said. "Performance requires an audience. When you're alone, when you think no one's watching, that's probably closer to real." "Then we're all liars when we're together," he said. I couldn't argue with that. We sat there as the room grew darker, none of us getting up to turn on the lights. I thought about all the small moments that had brought us here, the accumulated weight of choices made and words left unspoken. The camera sitting on the coffee table seemed absurd now, a tiny piece of technology that had captured too much and somehow not enough. "I need to know something," my wife said finally. "Do you love her? Your first wife?" "I did once. Now it's more like responsibility. Obligation." "And me?" I looked at her across the room, backlit by the last of the sunset. "I thought I did. Maybe I loved the version of you I wanted to see, or the version you showed me." "That's not an answer. It's the only honest one I have." Marcus stood again, and this time I didn't stop him. "I'm deleting all the footage," he said. "The whole study. I don't want any of this to exist." "Wait," I said. "That footage is evidence. We might need it." "For what? Divorce proceedings? Making sure everyone's equally guilty?" His voice cracked. "I just wanted to understand why everything felt fake. Now I understand, and it's worse." He picked up the laptop and walked out. I heard his footsteps on the stairs, the slam of his door. My wife and I looked at each other across the space between us, and I realized I didn't know what to say to Bridget. Maybe there wasn't a bridge, just an acknowledgement that the distance had always been there. We'd just been pretending otherwise. "I'll sleep in the guest room tonight," I said. "Tomorrow we can start making actual decisions." "What kind of decisions?" "Legal ones, practical ones. How to separate 2 lives that were never really joined." She nodded slowly. "And Marcus?" "We tell him the truth from now on, whatever that looks like." I went upstairs and packed a bag with essentials. My phone showed 3 missed calls from my first wife, probably wondering why I hadn't checked in. I'd call her later, start the conversation about how everything was about to change there too. In the guest room, I opened the window and listened to the neighborhood settling into evening. Dogs barking, a basketball bouncing on pavement somewhere, the distant sound of traffic. ordinary sounds that would continue regardless of what happened inside this house. I thought about my son's study, his attempt to document authentic behavior. What he'd found was that authenticity might be impossible in families, that we're all constantly adjusting our behavior based on who's watching, what's expected, what we can afford to reveal. But maybe that wasn't entirely true. Maybe the real behavior was exactly this, the moment when all the performance fell away and you had to deal with what was actually there. The mess and the failure and the recognition that you'd hurt people you'd meant to protect. I heard Marcus moving around in his room, the particular rhythm of someone who couldn't settle. I wondered what he was thinking, if he regretted his documentation project, or if he was glad to have proof that his instincts were correct. Either way, he'd learned something about his parents that would reshape how he saw the world. The next morning, I woke early and made coffee for the house. My wife came down first, already dressed for work despite it being Saturday. We stood on opposite sides of the kitchen island, two people who'd shared a bed for 17 years and now didn't know how to occupy the same room. "I'm going to stay with my sister for a few days," she said, "to think through next steps." "That makes sense. Marcus can stay here with you, unless you're going to your other family." "I'll stay here. We need to talk more, him and I." She poured coffee into a travel mug. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you about David. That's his name, David. I'm sorry, too, about everything." She left through the front door, and I heard her car start, the sound of it fading, down the street. Marcus came down an hour later. His eyes were red, his hair uncombed. He poured cereal without looking at me. "Your mom's staying with your aunt for a few days," I said. He nodded, kept eating. "Did you delete the footage?" "Most of it. I kept some of just me. Documentation of the documentation." "For what?" "Proof that I was here, that this happened." I understood that. The need to verify that something this significant had actually occurred wasn't just a bad night you could pretend away. "I'm going to see your half-siblings later," I said, "if you want to meet them." He looked up. "I have a half-brother and sister?" "Yes, they don't know about you either. I've kept everyone separate." "That's really messed up, Dad." "I know." He pushed the cereal bowl away. "Do they know I exist now?" "Not yet. I'll tell their mother today." "And then what?" "Then I figure out how to be honest with everyone involved, even if it's years too late." Marcus stood and rinsed his bowl, placed it carefully in the dishwasher. "I'm sorry I put up the cameras. It was invasive and wrong. You were trying to understand something that didn't make sense. I get that. But it still wasn't right." "No, it wasn't. And what your mom and I did wasn't right either. We're all going to have to live with those choices." He looked at me then, really looked, and I saw that he was old enough now to understand that adults don't have all the answers, that we're all just improvising through complicated situations and hoping we don't destroy too much in the process. "Can I come with you?" he said. "To meet them?" I thought about it, about introducing my son to his half-siblings, about the conversation with my first wife, about all the ways this could go wrong. "Yes," I said. "You should be part of this." We drove across town in silence, the kind of quiet that felt different from the performance of normalcy we'd maintained for years. This was just two people sitting with the weight of what they knew, not trying to pretend it away. I'd texted ahead, told my first wife I was bringing someone important. She was waiting on the porch when we pulled up, her face confused when she saw Marcus get out of the car. "Who's this?" she said. "This is Marcus, my son, from my second marriage." Her expression went through several changes before settling on something hard and distant. "You said you'd tell her. Years ago, you said you'd tell her and make it right. I didn't, and now everything's falling apart because I tried to keep both lives separate." She looked at Marcus. "Did you know about us?" "Just found out yesterday," he said. "I've been recording my family, trying to understand why everyone felt fake. Turns out everyone was lying." She studied him for a moment, then stepped aside. "Come in. Your brother and sister are doing homework in the kitchen." The next hour was strange and careful, watching my two families meet for the first time. The younger kids were curious, but not particularly bothered. They understood they had a half-brother the way kids understand most adult complications, with acceptance but not much investment. Marcus sat with them and talked about school, about normal things, and I watched him adjust his behavior again, becoming the older brother who was friendly but not intrusive. another performance, or maybe just the flexibility we all have to show different versions of ourselves depending on context. My first wife pulled me aside. "You can't keep doing this, dividing yourself between two families. It's not fair to anyone." "I know. I'm filing for divorce, making everything legal and clear." "About time." "I'm sorry it took this long." She shook her head. "I stopped being angry years ago. Now I'm just tired. We'll be fine. You need to figure out who you actually are when you're not pretending for someone else." That night, Marcus and I ate dinner at home, just the two of us. He'd been quiet since we'd left my other family, processing what he'd seen. "They seem nice," he said finally. "They are. Do you think Mom will want a divorce?" "Probably. I think we've been heading there for a while. We just didn't want to admit it." He pushed food around his plate. "Is this my fault? Because I put up the cameras?" "No, the cameras just showed what was already happening. If anything, you gave us the push we needed to stop pretending." "That's not much comfort." "I know." We cleaned up together, moving around the kitchen in a rhythm we'd developed over years of shared meals and ordinary evenings. Some of that was real, I thought. Some of what we'd built was actually solid. "I'm going to stay here," I said, "in this house. Your mom might want to sell it, but you'll always have a place with me." "What about the other kids?" "They have their home. I'll be more present there too now that I don't have to hide it." Marcus nodded. "So everyone just splits up and starts over?" "Something like that." He looked around the kitchen, at the marks on the doorframe where we'd measured his height over the years, at the art on the fridge from when he was younger, at all the accumulated evidence of a family that had existed in some form, even if not the one we'd pretended it was. "I'm deleting my observation study," he said. "For real this time. All of it." "You sure?" "Yeah, I don't need proof anymore. I know what happened." "Fair enough." He went upstairs and I heard him in his room, probably erasing files, removing the evidence of his surveillance. I thought about suggesting he keep something, some record of what we'd all learned, but maybe that was the wrong instinct. Maybe the point was to acknowledge what happened and then let it go, stop trying to document and control everything. 2 weeks later, I signed the papers that made my divorce official. My wife had been fair about the division of assets, more interested in getting it done than in extracting revenge. We'd agreed Marcus would split time between both houses, though he'd spend most of it with me since he was in his last year of high school. I'd established a formal custody and support arrangement with my first wife too, making legal what had been informal for too long. The paperwork felt like penance and relief in equal measure. Marcus and I settled into a new routine that was simpler, more honest. We talked more than we had before, about real things instead of the performance of father-son interaction. He'd given up his observation study, but kept his interest in psychology, applying to colleges with strong research programs. One evening, about a month after everything had broken, we were watching a movie together when he paused it mid-scene. "I keep thinking about the camera," he said, "about what it showed." "What about it?" "It showed us what we were doing, but it didn't show why. I still don't understand why you couldn't just tell the truth from the beginning." I thought about that. Fear, mostly. Fear that telling the truth would mean losing everything, so I tried to keep everything by lying, which meant I didn't really have anything real. But you had us, your family. I had the appearance of family, the performance of it, but I was so busy maintaining the act that I forgot to actually be present. He nodded slowly. That's what I was trying to document, I think, the difference between appearing to be something and actually being it. Did you figure out the answer? Not really. I just learned that everyone's performing at least a little bit. The question is whether there's anything real under the performance. And what do you think? He unpaused the movie. I think there is, but you have to be willing to let the performance drop, even if it means everything falls apart. We finished the movie in comfortable silence. Outside the window, the neighborhood was settling into evening, the same ordinary sounds that had been there all along. Dogs barking, kids playing, the distant hum of traffic. The world continuing regardless of what happened inside this house. I'd learned something from my son's documentation project, from his attempt to capture authentic behavior on camera. You can't really observe something without changing it, can't try to prove the truth without affecting what's true. But you can choose to be honest when the performance falls away. You can build something real from the wreckage of what wasn't. The camera was gone now, packed away or thrown out with Marcus's other abandoned projects. We didn't need it anymore. We'd all seen enough to understand what we'd been doing to each other and to ourselves. Now, we were living with what came after, the quieter and more difficult work of being actual people instead of performing our roles. My son went back to his homework, and I went back to the book I'd been reading. Two people sharing space honestly, without pretense or documentation. Just the small, reliable moment of being present together, which turned out to be the only thing that had ever really mattered.